Welcome back to NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports that as of January 1st, the U.S. cattle herd was the smallest since 1951. What are the trends that will impact the size of the U.S. beef cattle herd going forward? Cattleman to Cattleman reporter Brian Baxter got some insight on that issue from an Oklahoma State University economist.
With prices at or near record levels, it would seem cow-calf producers have the incentive they need to begin expanding their herds. But there are several factors that impact a producer's decision to grow their herd. In fact, if not for weather, Dr. Darrell Peel of Oklahoma State University says we'd already be in an expansion phase.
The last 3 years, the drought has been a major factor in causing additional liquidation of the U.S. beef herd. And I think the industry is poised, and actually has been poised through much of that time period, to begin expansion. Right now it's been a case, or up until now, it's been a case of what we would like to do versus what Mother Nature will let us do. And that's still an issue out there. Drought conditions moderated in the last half of 2013. In much of the country now, it looks the best it has in about 3 years. Having said that, we're still vulnerable. We could go the other way. So as we move forward, the weather forecast and the forage conditions will continue to be a key.
Last year's calf crop was the smallest since 1949, and Dr. Peel says growing the herd means tight calf supplies will be the norm for the next few years.
Clearly, and it's been there in every cattle cycle historically, there's that trade-off between the immediate value of that heifer as a feeder animal versus the investment value of that heifer for future production. For some producers right now, they're not quite at that level, but I think as we go forward, the market's going to be very vigorous about providing the incentives for the cow-calf sector to expand, because that is the source of supply for the entire industry. So, where we are now with these almost historically low calf crop and feeder supplies, we have to, save enough heifers out of that to rebuild the herd. So for 2014, 2015, into 2016, we're talking about a significant tightening of already tight feeder cattle supplies, and that translates into tighter beef production. And all of that is to say that, the pressure we've already seen on wholesale and retail beef prices will be accentuated even more when we get fully into this expansion period.
When expansion of the cow herd does begin, Dr. Peel says it will take time just to recover from the past 3 years that were impacted by the drought and other adverse weather conditions.
So it probably takes 3 years to add maybe 1.8 to 1.9 million head to the herd. And then at that point, I think we'll be in a position to assess how much bigger than that might we need to be. And it'll depend on market conditions at that time, but I think it's entirely possible that we could be looking at another 1.5 to 2 million head expansion potential beyond that level. And that would certainly take another 3 or more years beyond that. If we can sustain it continuously, we're talking about basically being an expansion for much of the rest of the decade. And that's something we haven't seen in the beef industry since the early 1990s, a 5 to 6 year expansion phase.
Of course, another major influence on the cattle market outlook is feed grain prices, and Dr. Peel sees the trends in those prices resulting in some structural changes within the cattle industry.
This industry evolved, the production systems that we have utilized in this industry have evolved over the last 30 to 40 years in a remarkably, cheap grain, stable grain price environment that provided incentives to do things certain ways. And I think fundamentally from here on, we're talking about more expensive feed grains. It puts more focus in my mind on forage and shifting a portion of what we do, from grains back to forage, not in terms of not using feedlots, but in terms of the amount of the total pounds of those animals that comes from a forage perspective relative to a grain intensive system. And so I think there's some long-term structural change taking place here.
And with a generally higher baseline for grain prices, the shift to fewer days on feed and greater reliance on forage could provide opportunities for those interested in backgrounding calves.
I think it actually enhances the stocker kind of incentives in the industry, that notion of putting more of the feeder cattle weight on with forage and taking a little bit off the front end of the finishing phase as far as fed cattle goes. So, we will be trying to regrow the herd, and obviously that challenges our forage base in certain regions. But at the same time, in general, the market signals now support more weight gain at the stocker level or backgrounding level than we saw in the past, simply because that's where the value lies relative to putting all of that weight on in a feedlot using expensive feed grains.
Weather, forage availability, grain prices, and one more influence, the average age of cattle producers is nearing 60, and some may be reluctant to grow their herd beyond the current size unless a ready successor is coming into the operation. In any case, Dr. Peel says 2014 may be the year when the U.S. cattle inventory finally begins moving higher. I'm Brian Baxter reporting for NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
To learn more from Dr. Darrell Peel on herd expansion, look for an article in your next issue of the National Cattleman. It's the official publication of NCBA and provides timely news and information about the issues affecting the beef industry. A subscription is included free of charge when you become a member of NCBA. Now, joining is easy. Just give us a call at 1-866-USA-BEEF or visit us online at beefusa.org.